In this recording we're going to look at the mechanisms in learning a skill. So how does a learner take in information, comprehend this information, and then use it to perform an action? If a coach has an understanding how a learner processes the information, then they are better able to prepare the information needed by the learner and provide feedback in the most effective way. So in order to help understand how a learner processes information, a particular theory or model has been devised, and it is just a theory. There are other theories which are now beginning to become popular in understanding how learners process information. But for now, let's look at the information processing model. There are 4 phases: input, information processing, output, and feedback. So the input relies on the sensory acuity of the learner, in other words, the ability of the learner to use their senses to detect cues or information. So if we look at what that information is called, we refer to them quite often as cues, which are in the environment detected by sight, sound, touch. The vestibular in the inner ear gives information back to the learner about balance and their body position. Proprioceptors in the joints, ligaments, tendons are able to give information about the position of the body in space, and also the length of the muscles at any particular time and the amount of muscle force or contraction, the force of the contraction which occurs as well. So that information is detected by proprioceptors and is all invaluable or valuable information for the learner. So for processing the information, the learner needs to first of all detect any signals or cues in the environment. And so that's what we refer to as sensory acuity, which is simply the ability of the senses to pick up the information needed. So if you can imagine if someone was hearing impaired, then their sensory acuity would be poor in terms of detecting audible cues. However, they may compensate for their limited hearing to be more sensory acuity, have better sensory acuity in their sense of sight. Whether a learner is able to detect the signals is also dependent on the strength of the cue. So in the example I've got here, the cue itself is a cricket ball, is a moving cricket ball. So if you can imagine that you're a batter, and the cue in the environment is the ball that you need to detect. And so depending on the time of day or whether the game is played under lights or whether it's a cloudy day, the cue would need to be made as strong as possible to help not just the learner but the player itself. So a variety of different colours of cricket balls are suitable for a variety of different environments, the whole purpose of which is to strengthen the cue. Noise refers to not necessarily audible noise, but any other distractions. It could be a visual distraction as well. Of course, noise needs to be limited in order for the appropriate cues to be detected the most strongly. The speed of the cue is also very important for a learner. If the cue is moving too quickly, for example, a ball, so if you can imagine an example of playing cricket, then expecting a beginner to face a fast bowler and be successful is not realistic. And so the speed of the cue, or the speed of the ball bowled to the learner, needs to be reduced in order for them to be able to perform the skill and detect the cues, have time to detect the cue or the moving ball. Signal detection also depends on the level of arousal. So this is where we talk about the inverted U hypothesis. So this hypothesis literally means an inverted U or an upside down U. So the performance is plotted on the y-axis from poor grading up to good, and the level of arousal is plotted from low, under-aroused, through to high or over-aroused. And the theory is that there is a section or a level of arousal which is the most appropriate for good performance or the best performance. So any level of low arousal or a sort of a laissez-faire attitude or don't care attitude is going to result in poor performance. Conversely, if the athlete is overexcited or anxious, then that will result in poor performance. So a moderate amount of arousal is required. So different sports or different activities will require different levels of emotional arousal. So this diagram is comparing playing golf with performing weightlifting activities and the level of arousal required to perform the best in each of the two different activities. And so in golf, where the intention of the action is to be as accurate as possible, but with not necessarily the maximum amount of muscle contraction, particularly if we're talking about putting, then a lower level of arousal is required compared with weightlifting, in which the intention of the activity is to lift the greatest amount of weight possible, and so a higher level of arousal is often required for activities such as weightlifting. So you can imagine what may motivate a weightlifter to enter that particular zone of optimal arousal. Particular types of music might motivate the athlete, or having a coach talking in such a way to get them motivated, compared with the way a coach may talk to a golfer who's about to perform a putt for perhaps a championship. Their level of arousal needs to be much lower. So when we're talking about having to process information from the environment, a learner needs to be able to filter out the information that they don't need. So this is called selective attention. Of course, at professional level, there is a lot of distractions from crowds. So this is a golf example. This may have been soccer or AFL, Australian rules football. So the athlete needs to be able to filter out the distractions from booing or calling out, any crowd noise, in order to still perform the skill at their best. Anticipation is the ability to predict what will happen next. So this relies on accurate selective attention and is based on previous experience. Memory is also going to play a part in helping the learner decide which cues are relevant or not through their long-term memory. So once the cues have been detected and interpreted and processed, then the athlete will make a decision about what action to perform. So it's then from the brain a message is sent to the muscles to carry out a particular motor program or action. So the action involves a number of different parts. First of all, reaction time. So this is the time taken to process the information. Movement time, the time taken to complete the movement. And those two combined is what's called the response time. The reaction time plus the movement time. So the athlete will detect a cue, they will react to that cue, they will then perform the movement. This is known as the response time, from the time that the cue is first detected until the action is then completed. So the final phase of the information processing model is feedback. So information about the performance is given, and it serves to either motivate the athlete or the learner to reinforce an action or a movement, or to make a change. The feedback can come in the form of internal feedback, information from the proprioceptors in the muscles and joints and ligaments. It can also be received from an external source, from the senses. So augmented feedback from a coach or from video. There's positive or negative feedback, continuous feedback which occurs throughout a performance. Terminal feedback is given after the performance. And then knowledge of results is seeing the outcome of the performance. So if the ball misses the goal or goes into the goal is knowledge of results. Knowledge of performance is understanding why the movement resulted in that particular outcome. So understanding specific movements of the body which resulted in the action being either successful or not successful. So the information processing model of input, information processing, output and feedback is one model or one theory by which a coach can develop an understanding how their athlete is able to take in information and then produce a performance or an action as a result. It is, however, just one particular theory.